Ladies and gentlemen, make some noise for Sophie Cunningham. Make some noise for Sophie Cunningham, someone who came over to Indiana and knew exactly how to capitalize on the Caitlin Clark effect. When we talk about all the DeWanna Bonners, when we talk about the Natasha Howards, the Alyssa Smiths, when we talk about all the toxic situations that revolve around Indiana that at least the media put out, let's pay attention.
There are moments in sports that don't just make headlines, they rewrite the entire rule book. They expose who actually holds the power, who the fans actually care about, and who has been quietly getting away with collecting checks they never earned. And what just happened in the WNBA isn't one of those moments. It's something far bigger, far more permanent, and far more devastating for everyone who spent the last 2 years trying to convince the world that Caitlin Clark was just a temporary trend. Because in exactly 60 minutes, the entire financial hierarchy of women's basketball didn't just shift, it collapsed. And the number sitting at the center of that collapse is $5.9 million, gone in 1 hour. And the people who thought they ran this league didn't see a single dollar of it. Let that sink in for a second. While veteran players were busy doing podcast interviews claiming Clark's popularity was a bubble ready to burst, while established names were rolling their eyes at rookies and phoning in all-star performances for cameras they assumed would forgive them, Caitlin Clark and Sophie Cunningham were quietly loading a financial weapon that nobody saw coming. No press conference, no dramatic announcement, no trash talk, just a shoe drop. And what happened next sent shockwaves through every boardroom, every sneaker brand headquarters, and every veteran locker room in the entire league. Because in 60 minutes flat, $5.9 million worth of merchandise didn't just sell, it evaporated. And the people left standing in the wreckage are still trying to figure out what hit them. Grab a seat. This is going to take a minute to fully unpack, because this story isn't just about shoes, it's about power. It's about who really owns the WNBA in 2026, and the answer is going to shock a lot of people who thought they already knew. When the countdown clock hit 0 on the Adidas website, nobody was ready for what came next. Not the servers, not the sneaker executives, and definitely not the veteran players watching from the sidelines. Within seconds of the Adidas Crazy Energy collab going live, millions of fans from Indiana to international markets flooded the website simultaneously. The traffic was so overwhelming, so completely unprecedented for a WNBA-related drop, that the servers instantly buckled under the pressure and crashed. We're not talking about a minor slowdown. We're talking about a full digital blackout, the kind of back-end collapse that sneaker executives typically only see during the most massive global releases on the planet. Travis Scott levels, Michael Jordan levels. That's the company Caitlin Clark is keeping now, and nobody in the WNBA front office had the foresight to prepare for it. Within minutes of the site recovering, sizes started disappearing one by one. Size 8, gone. Size 9, gone. The comment sections across social media filled up instantly with fans watching their sizes vanish in real time, frantically switching between tabs, refreshing browsers, desperately trying to lock in an order before the inventory disappeared entirely. And it wasn't just Clark's colorway. Sophie Cunningham's custom drop was moving at almost the exact same speed, wiping out size after size with a velocity that left everyone stunned. By the time the dust settled, the Adidas website showed a near-complete sellout across both men's and women's sizes, with only the largest, most niche sizes remaining in limited quantities. The final tally? $5.9 million in revenue in 60 minutes from a single shoe drop for 2 players in a league that certain veteran athletes and media personalities have spent years claiming was perfectly healthy without Caitlin Clark's influence. The scoreboard doesn't lie. And this time, the scoreboard was a 9-figure bank statement. What makes this story even more remarkable is how Clark handled. She didn't post a victory lap, she didn't respond to critics, she didn't even acknowledge the chaos unfolding in real time. She let the numbers do every single bit of the talking. And when the numbers are $5.9 million in 60 minutes, they don't need any help. Here's where the story gets uncomfortable for a lot of people, because while Clark and Cunningham were making history, the rest of the league's merchandise market was telling a completely different story, and that story is not a good one. For months leading up to this moment, veteran WNBA players had been making the media rounds, sitting in front of podcast microphones, doing press runs, claiming that Clark's popularity was manufactured, that the fans would eventually get bored and redirect their attention back to the established names. They said it with confidence, they said it repeatedly, and sneaker brands, taking those veterans at their word, had invested significant money into player deals, signature colorways, and merchandise campaigns built around athletes who'd spent years in the league and theoretically had loyal fan bases to tap into.
The retail market just gave everyone the results of that experiment, and the results are catastrophic. While Clark and Cunningham's inventory was evaporating in real time, other players' merchandise was sitting completely still. No movement. Flatline numbers. The kind of sales figures that make brand executives go completely quiet in meetings. Reports surfaced showing certain shoe sizes in 12.5 variants still fully available, not because the inventory was large, but because the demand simply wasn't there. Sneaker brands that had bet heavily on veteran players were watching their investments collect dust in warehouses, while two players they might have underestimated were generating $5.9 million in a single hour. The fans made a decision. It wasn't coordinated. Nobody sent out a memo, but millions of people, independently and simultaneously, chose to spend their money on Clark and Cunningham and to simply ignore everyone else. And in 2026's economy, where every dollar is a conscious decision, that kind of collective financial statement is absolutely devastating. The fans who had been showing up to arenas, watching games, buying tickets, and investing emotionally in this league had apparently been paying very close attention to what was happening on and off the court. And when the moment came to open their wallets, they remembered everything. They remembered the lazy all-star performances. They remembered the missed layups. They remembered the podcast comments and the subtle jabs at rookies who were bringing in more viewers than the entire league had seen in years. And they responded the only way that matters in professional sports. They withheld their money completely. And no amount of brand investment or media spin can fix that once it happens. If the $5.9 million headline belongs to anyone equally alongside Caitlin Clark, it belongs to Sophie Cunningham. And the fact that Cunningham is in this conversation at all is one of the most remarkable storylines in recent WNBA history, because not long ago, she was barely a footnote. Cunningham wasn't selected for the 2026 WNBA All-Star Game. She was the kind of player that league executives and media personalities conveniently overlooked when building their narratives. She wasn't in the highlight packages, she wasn't getting the primetime features. She was doing her job, playing hard, defending with intensity, and supporting her teammates in ways that the cameras occasionally caught, but the league never made a point to celebrate. She was, in the language of sports media, a role player, an enforcer. Someone who existed in the background. The fans were watching a different player entirely. What the fans saw was someone who actually competed, someone who played every minute like it mattered, someone who threw herself into the physical, unglamorous side of the game, while certain other players were visibly jogging through possessions and treating an All-Star weekend like a casual social event. And most importantly, the fans saw someone who stood firmly and unapologetically beside Caitlin Clark when the rest of the league was trying to make Clark feel unwelcome. That loyalty registered deeply, and it registered financially in a way nobody predicted. When Cunningham's custom Adidas colorway dropped alongside Clark's, the assumption in certain circles was that hers would move significantly slower, that she simply didn't have the star power to generate the same kind of consumer frenzy. Maybe her shoes would sell respectably, maybe they'd have a modest release day, but matching Clark's sellout pace? Nobody expected that. The fans mobilized like an army. Cunningham's inventory disappeared at nearly the same speed as Clark's. Every size gone, every colorway cleared. and the people who had laughed at the idea of Cunningham having signature shoe energy were suddenly very, very quiet. Caitlin Clark had made a point of publicly demanding that Cunningham be included in the All-Star festivities, recognizing that Cunningham was one of the few players actually giving honest effort and deserving of recognition. The fans heard that, they remembered it, and they rewarded it with something the league can't manufacture, can't spin, and can't fake: cold, hard purchasing power. The shoe at the center of all of this is the Adidas Crazy Energy, a performance basketball model priced at $110. That price point matters. This wasn't a luxury flex. This wasn't a $200 limited collector's item designed to create artificial scarcity and hype. This was a legitimately priced performance shoe that real basketball fans could actually afford to buy. And at $110 a pair, generating $5.9 million in 60 minutes means tens of thousands of pairs sold in a single hour. The math alone is staggering.
But the more interesting story isn't the shoe itself. It's the company that made the bet on these two players years before anyone else was paying attention. Adidas quietly signed Sophie Cunningham back in 2022. At the time, she was wearing $45 shoes during games. She wasn't a household name. She wasn't generating national headlines. She was a young player with potential and an edge that the right brand could eventually do something with. Most of the industry wasn't paying attention. Adidas was. Over the following years, Cunningham steadily moved up within the Adidas family. She went from wearing budget performance models to appearing in the marketing campaign for the Dame 10, one of Adidas's flagship basketball silhouettes. It was a slow build, a quiet investment in a player whose value the brand clearly believed in before the broader market caught up. And then Caitlin Clark arrived in the WNBA, brought a seismic audience with her, and Sophie Cunningham happened to be standing right next to her. The timing wasn't luck. It was the result of years of relationship building and brand positioning that most people never noticed until the sellout numbers hit the internet. The executives at Adidas right now are not panicking. They are not scrambling. They are sitting very comfortably, watching what amounts to one of the greatest buy low, sell high investments in recent sports marketing history fully pay off. They saw something in Cunningham years ago. They stayed patient, and the $5.9 million hour just validated every single decision they made. For Clark's side of the equation, the Adidas partnership has been equally calculated. The brand recognized early that Clark wasn't just drawing casual basketball fans. She was pulling in people who had never watched a WNBA game before. She was converting passive interest into passionate, commercially active fandom. And commercially active fans buy shoes, they buy jerseys, they buy merchandise, they show up. The traffic generated by Clark's shoe drop reportedly matched the kind of numbers Adidas sees during their biggest global launches, the kind of events they spend months preparing for, with massive inventory runs and marketing budgets. Clark generated it with a single-player exclusive colorway and a countdown clock. Here's the part of the story that gets genuinely fascinating. Because the financial explosion didn't stop with Clark and Cunningham. The shockwave spread outward and hit players who didn't even have anywhere near the same individual star power. Because when millions of fans flooded the Adidas website to get their hands on Clark and Cunningham's shoes, they didn't just look at those two options and leave. They browsed, they scrolled, and some of them bought. Other players' colorways on the same drop page started showing movement, not $5.9 million in 60 minutes kind of movement, but real, measurable sales activity from fans who had arrived at the website because of Clark and Cunningham and ended up exploring what else was available. Players whose shoes might have otherwise registered almost zero organic traffic in the early hours of release day were suddenly seeing actual purchase numbers, modest but real, entirely because of the audience Clark and Cunningham had pulled in. Think about what that means. The star power of two players was so overwhelming that it was generating revenue for the entire surrounding ecosystem simply by attracting eyeballs. Fans who came for Sophie Cunningham's pink colorway and found their size sold out, scrolled down and bought something else.
Fans who came for Clark and discovered her most popular sizes were gone didn't always leave empty-handed. The rising tide was lifting every boat on that page, at least temporarily, and entirely because of two players the league had never fully gotten behind. One particularly striking detail emerged from the fan commentary surrounding the drop. Certain pink colorways from other players were reportedly being purchased, partly because fans assumed they might be Cunningham's. The energy she had generated was so strong that it was creating accidental halo sales for shoes that had nothing to do with her. That is not something you can plan for. That is organic, momentum-driven fan behavior that only happens when a player has genuinely captured the public imagination. The numbers tell the full story. Cunningham's drop page was generating traffic that had a measurable positive financial impact on every other player sharing that digital real estate. Not because those players earned it independently, and not because the league promoted them effectively, but purely because of the gravitational pull of Caitlin Clark and Sophie Cunningham's combined star power. That's a remarkable thing to observe, and it raises a very uncomfortable question for league executives who spent years insisting the WNBA success is a collective product rather than a star-driven one. The WNBA front office has a serious problem, and the $5.9 million hour just put that problem on full, brutal, public display.
The league has been operating on a model that made sense in a different era. A top-down model where the league controls the narrative, decides which players get promoted, manages media relationships to ensure certain athletes stay in the spotlight, and assumes that fans will follow wherever they're pointed. It worked, to some degree, in the 1990s and early 2000s. It worked when there were only a handful of ways for fans to consume sports content, and the league controlled most of them. That era is completely over, and the front office appears to have not gotten the memo. In 2026, fans don't wait to be told who to love. They make their own decisions. They watch games, they watch highlights, they follow players on social media, they read commentary from independent creators, they form their own opinions based on what they actually observe on the court, and then they invest, financially and emotionally, in the players they've decided deserve it. The fans who showed up and wiped out $5.9 million of inventory in 60 minutes did not do so because the WNBA told them to. They did it because they had spent months, in some cases years, deciding for themselves who deserved their support and who didn't. And that is a fundamental shift in power that the league is completely unprepared for. The front office can still schedule games, they can still set rosters, they can still choose which players get featured in official league marketing, but they cannot make fans open their wallets, they cannot force commercial success, they cannot manufacture the kind of organic, passionate, financially active fan engagement that Clark and Cunningham are generating naturally. And every attempt to pretend otherwise, every decision to prop up players whose merchandise isn't moving, while subtly sidelining the ones whose merchandise is creating server crashes, just accelerates the credibility gap between the league and its own audience. Sophie Cunningham made a pointed observation about this herself when she called out the front office for operating on prehistoric time. The comment was blunt, but it was accurate. The league's marketing infrastructure, its promotional priorities, its relationships with media partners, its entire approach to building stars reads like a blueprint written decades ago for a media landscape that no longer exists. Fans are not passive consumers anymore. They are active participants in the sports economy, and they are ruthlessly efficient at redirecting their spending toward the athletes they've chosen to champion. The veterans who spent months doing podcast circuits trying to undermine Clark's credibility, the market just graded their strategy. The grade is not flattering. There's a human story underneath all of these revenue numbers, and it's one that deserves to be told clearly, because the Sophie Cunningham chapter of this saga isn't just a marketing success story. It's a story about what happens when you decide to be genuine in an environment that often rewards performance over authenticity. Before the June 17th incident where Cunningham physically intervened to defend Caitlin Clark on the court, she had fewer than 1 million followers on TikTok.
She was a solid player on a high-profile team, but she existed largely outside the broader cultural conversation. She wasn't someone brands were rushing to sign. She wasn't someone media companies were pitching shows around. She was Sophie Cunningham, good player, tough competitor, not yet a name that casual fans would recognize. Then she stood up. In a moment that the cameras caught completely, Cunningham grabbed a player who had put her hands on Clark and made it abundantly clear that certain behavior would not be tolerated. It wasn't subtle, it wasn't diplomatic, it was the kind of raw, instinctive teammate loyalty that sports fans respond to on a visceral level. You can analyze it strategically all you want, but the reality is simpler than that. Cunningham saw a teammate being treated unfairly, and she did something about it, publicly and without hesitation. The internet remembered. Within weeks of that moment, her TikTok following began climbing rapidly. Fans who had never paid attention to her before started seeking out her content, her interviews, her personality. They found someone who was genuinely entertaining, physically expressive, completely unafraid to speak her mind, and deeply loyal to the people she cared about. The combination was irresistible. She now sits at 3 million TikTok followers, a number that would be impressive for any athlete in any league, but is particularly remarkable for a player who wasn't even selected for the All-Star game. The shoe drop was the financial culmination of everything that built up over those months. The fans who had been following Cunningham's journey since June, who had watched her go from overlooked enforcer to cultural phenomenon, showed up in force when it mattered. They didn't just click on her colorway out of curiosity, they bought it, immediately, in massive numbers, because they had already decided long before the drop went live that Sophie Cunningham was someone worth investing in. That is what genuine loyalty looks like in 2026, and it has a dollar value attached to it that the WNBA's established hierarchy is going to be thinking about for a very long time.
Let's be completely direct about what the $5.9 million hour means for Caitlin Clark's broader trajectory, because the conversation has moved well beyond basketball at this point, and anyone still trying to analyze her purely through a sports lens is fundamentally misunderstanding what's happening. Clark has officially crossed into a different category of public figure. She was already breaking television ratings records, she was already selling out arenas from coast to coast, turning venues that had previously struggled to fill seats into must-attend events that fans were willing to travel for. She was already generating cultural moments that extended far beyond the basketball court. But moving $5.9 million of physical merchandise in 60 minutes does something different to a public profile. It transforms a cultural moment into a verifiable economic force, and economic forces operate by different rules than sports celebrities. Economic forces attract investment on a different scale. They attract brand partnerships that go beyond endorsements into genuine equity conversations. They attract media companies looking for long-term content relationships. They attract industries that have nothing to do with basketball, but recognize a personality with the ability to move product at a speed and scale that most global brands spend years trying to build. Clark is generating that kind of pull right now, organically, without a massive corporate machine behind her manufacturing the demand. That's the rarest thing in modern sports. The trajectory toward billionaire status that some analysts are now openly discussing isn't hyperbole. It's a logical projection based on observable commercial reality. She is already a one-woman economic ecosystem, generating revenue not just for herself, but for teammates, brand partners, arena concession operations, local businesses near every venue she plays in, and apparently now for other players sharing digital real estate with her on a shoe drop page. The multiplier effect of her presence is documented and measurable. The question isn't whether she becomes one of the wealthiest athletes in women's sports history. The question is how quickly it happens and how many people it takes with her on the way. For the WNBA as an institution, Clark is both the greatest gift and the most uncomfortable challenge the league has ever faced.
She has single-handedly elevated the financial ceiling of the entire enterprise. But she has done it on her own terms, through fan loyalty she earned independently and brand relationships she built without the league's meaningful assistance. The front office benefits enormously from her presence while simultaneously struggling to control a narrative that she and her fans have already taken ownership of. That tension is not going away. If anything, the $5.9 million hour just made it significantly more pronounced. There's a reason the veteran players and league executives are sitting in uncomfortable silence right now. It's not just that the numbers were embarrassing, it's that the numbers made a statement about the future, not just the present. Because what Clark and Cunningham demonstrated in 60 minutes isn't a one-time anomaly. It's a proof of concept. It's evidence of a new model for building commercial success in women's basketball. A model that bypasses the traditional power structures entirely and goes straight from athlete to fan with nothing in between. The old model required league approval, it required media relationships, it required being in the right conversations with the right executives and getting selected for the right promotional campaigns. It was a gate-kept system, and the people holding the gates had been very comfortable with that arrangement for a very long time. Clark and Cunningham just demonstrated that the gates are irrelevant. When fans are that motivated, when loyalty is that deep, when the product is that compelling, no gate can hold back $5.9 million in 60 minutes. The fans don't need permission. They don't need the league to tell them who matters. They already decided. And their decision landed like a financial detonation in the middle of every assumption the establishment had been operating on. The veteran players who spent All-Star Weekend putting in minimal effort while Clark and Cunningham were building toward this moment are now facing a brutal reckoning. Their merchandise isn't moving. Their brand partnerships are quietly being reassessed. Their leverage within the league is diminishing in direct proportion to the growing commercial dominance of the players they spent years trying to undermine. Every passive-aggressive comment, every shady foul, every podcast dismissal of Clark's legitimacy added another brick to the wall between those veterans and the fans whose spending they desperately needed. That wall is now fully built, and nobody is buying what's on the other side of it. Sophie Cunningham went from wearing $45 shoes to generating a sellout drop that contributed to a $5.9 million hour. She did it without all-star selection. She did it without league promotional support. She did it without the establishment's blessing. She did it by being authentic, by being loyal, by competing hard, and by aligning herself with a player whose gravitational pull is rewriting the economics of the entire league. That is a roadmap, and it's one that younger players are absolutely watching and taking notes on right now.
The servers are back online. The inventory pages show their sad, picked-over remains of only the most obscure sizes still available. The Adidas warehouse teams are presumably already in conversations about a restock, and somewhere in a WNBA front office, executives are staring at a revenue number they didn't generate, a cultural moment they didn't create, and a fan army they have absolutely no idea how to manage. $5.9 million, 60 minutes, 2 players, 1 shoe drop. The simplicity of those facts is what makes them so devastating for the old guard. There was no complex strategy here. There was no massive promotional budget. There was no carefully orchestrated media campaign. There was a countdown clock, a genuinely hungry and passionate fan base, and 2 athletes who had earned the kind of loyalty that cannot be manufactured or purchased. The result was a financial event that will be studied in sports marketing classrooms for years. But zoom out for a moment, because the real story isn't the $5.9 million, impressive as that number is. The real story is what it represents about where power in the WNBA now actually lives. It doesn't live in the front office, it doesn't live in the veterans' locker room, it doesn't live with the media personalities who spent 2 years trying to shape the narrative about who belongs and who doesn't. The power lives with the fans. It always did, technically, but the fans just demonstrated that they know it now. They demonstrated it with receipts.
$5,900,000 worth of receipts generated in the time it takes to watch a single quarter of basketball. The players who understand this new reality, who recognize that the path to commercial success in 2026 women's basketball runs directly through genuine fan connection rather than institutional approval, those players are going to thrive in ways the old model never allowed for. The players who keep waiting for the league to anoint them, who keep doing podcast circuits hoping the right people will notice, who keep assuming the established hierarchy will protect their commercial value indefinitely, those players are going to keep watching their merchandise sit in warehouses. Caitlin Clark is not going anywhere. Sophie Cunningham is just getting started. And the fans who made $5.9 million disappear in 60 minutes are already looking ahead to the next drop, the next game, the next moment, where they get to decide, loudly and financially, who they actually believe in. The old guard had their chance. They chose jealousy over excellence, politics over performance, and gatekeeping over growth. The market just handed them the bill, and based on the sellout numbers sitting on Adidas' servers right now, that bill is going to be very, very difficult to pay. The era of fan-driven power in the WNBA didn't just arrive, it arrived at $5.9 million per hour. And for everyone who spent the last 2 years betting against Caitlin Clark and the movement she's building, the most unsettling truth of all is this: she is nowhere near done.